Where the hell am I supposed to put my tent? Hello friends, Dork on the road here, and we are out motorcycle camping. And while I'm scouring the campsite for a place to put up my tent, it occurred to me that some of you may have questions about how to choose the perfect site for your tent. So let's talk about it while I find a spot for my tent. So there are some obvious factors to consider when choosing a spot to set up your tent. You got to survey the campsite, and most people just look for the flattest spot possible. And that is desirable, but it's not the only consideration. A nice flat spot is great, unless it's covered in blackberry briars or a bunch of sharp pokey sticks, or at the bottom of a gully where all the rainwater is going to collect, or, I don't know, next to a corpse of a deer, which is actually right over there. There are a few other things to consider, so I thought I would just kind of verbalize what I'm looking at as I look through this campsite trying to find where I want to put my tent. Also keeping in mind that Tim is coming up to meet me, so not only do I have to find a spot for me, but I have to make sure I leave a decent enough spot for him. So if you get to the campsite first, you get first dibs, so there's nothing stopping me from taking the best spot if there's more than one, or if there's only one good spot, there's nothing stopping me from taking it. Let your conscience be your guide, but sometimes it's nice, especially when your friend's gonna roll in after dark like he's going to tonight, to have an idea where a good spot for their tent is as well. But let's look at a couple options here. So the spot I'm in is a logging landing, you know, one of those places where they would park a tower and drag trees up and put them on log trucks. And they often get turned into campsites when they're no longer actively logging in the area. There's a fire pit here. Obviously, I'm not the first person to camp here, but it's on a hill. There's not a lot of super flat spots here. But as an example, the spot I'm sitting in right now, this is maybe the flattest portion that's tent-sized here. But as you can see, there's a big pile of old logs, soggy logs that sadly I won't be able to burn here. But more importantly, here in the flat spot, there's a whole bunch of like blackberry briars and sticks and rocks and stuff that I would have to work to clear if I wanted to put my tent here. So if I had no other choice, I might take the time to clear this spot, but it's going to take a few minutes to half an hour, really, depending on how thoroughly I want to get it. So I'm going to keep looking because just flatness is not the only consideration. You also need to be considerate of your neighbors if you have them, up to and including, you know, an old dead deer. So I don't really want to set my tent up right on top of this. Fortunately, it's in the middle of a bunch of blackberry briars, so it's not really a viable option anyway. And fortunately, it's mostly gone, so there's no smell. A fresh corpse or a semi-fresh corpse like this would have an awful smell. We wouldn't even be able to camp here. So here's the rest of the site, as you can see. And it's just well slanted, but there's a decent little flat spot right here. So another important thing to consider when you're choosing a spot for your tent is rain runoff or drainage. What you want to avoid is a spot that's like down in a gully, like where all the rainwater is going to run down and collect. Now, it probably won't rain tonight, but one, I never take chances with rain. And two, even if it hasn't rained that day, if it's a spot down in a gully, it's going to be moisture and just have more gross stuff, and your tent's going to be wetter on the bottom and all that. You're gonna have to deal with it. So on a slope is generally okay. You just don't want to be at the bottom of a slope, as long as the water can run off and past where you're camping. This isn't perfectly flat, but it's actually pretty good. Setting up a tent on a hill in this spot is basically unavoidable. I'm gonna be on a slope. So when you set up on a slight slope, don't go on a super steep slope, but on a slight slope like this, the trick is turn your tent perpendicular to the hill, like this, and then put your head uphill. You want your head uphill so that all the blood is not rushing to your head all night. It's far more comfortable to sleep the other way. And also you want it perpendicular because if you set up on the side of the hill, you're gonna spend all night fighting not to roll off of your air mattress or out of your tent or whatever. So if I were to set up right here, I would put my tent sideways with my head up that way. I think maybe the camera's tilted so it looks backwards, but trust me, uphill is that way. So always set up your tent perpendicular to the hill with your head uphill if you can. This isn't a bad spot, but there's another one over here I like. The other thing you really want to look out for when choosing a spot for your tent is garbage and other debris on the ground, particularly if it's like this where there's like burnt ash and stuff. It's pretty clear this was a fire pit. There's likely to be nails and other garbage, broken glass, things like that here. So you definitely don't want to set your tent up anywhere that looked like a fire pit or anywhere that people have been dumping trash, because you just don't know, freaking needles and stuff, what could be underneath there. So be careful. Another thing to consider when choosing a spot for your tent is proximity to the fire. Now in a campground, you're not gonna have many options close to the fire, but in a dispersed spot like this, there's all kinds of options here, but you don't wanna put your tent too close to the fire for a couple reasons. One, you never know which way the wind's gonna blow. It could fill your tent with smoke. It'll make your tent smell like smoke forever. You don't want that. And two, embers from the fire can pop out, land on your tent. Your tent's just made of nylon. It's gonna burn holes in your footprint or the walls of your tent, and your tent is no longer gonna be waterproof. So I don't like to set up any closer than 4 or 5 feet from the fire, but I don't want to be too far from the fire because there's a nice wooded area over there. And, you know, I could set up out there, and we do that sometimes. The presence of the animal remains over there kind of makes me want to be close to the fire, though. I'm being overly paranoid, but if there is a predator out here, I'd like to be sleeping as close to the fire as possible. And I have seen a cougar out here less than a mile away, so I know there is one out here somewhere. I sincerely doubt it's going to mess with a couple of loud guys with a campfire, but it is nice to not be far off in the woods, but instead be close to the fire, close to the smells of humans. Now, there is a disadvantage to that if you're cooking over your fire, because then you're sleeping right next to where the food smells are. There's really multiple schools of thought there. We don't really have bear problems here, so we don't worry too much about separating our food from our campsites in this part of the country, but in some places you definitely want to set up your tent as far from the campfire as possible, or at least from wherever you're cooking. I don't know if you can see, so you can see the slant behind me, you can see the fire pit, but right here there's actually this little mound, which if you look at it carefully, actually makes it kind of flat right there. So I think I'm gonna set my tent up right here. It's maybe one of the flattest places here. It's about 5 feet away from the fire, but still close enough that I'll be able to see it and hear it and have the light from it if I need it to get in and out of bed in the nighttime. Seems like a good spot. It's flat enough. There's still a slight slant. Uphill is behind me, so I'll put my head at this end, but I think I'm gonna put my tent right there. Nice thing about a tent footprint is you can set it out and figure out exactly where your tent's gonna be before you even start staking it down. And this one, it matters, so the head is here with the 2 white pegs, and so I know that the head of my tent is going to be right here, so I can try to get it on the most level spot and perpendicular to the top of the hill and know that I'm probably good. I feel good about this. So my head is uphill. This tent has a top and a bottom. So the one with the 2 poles is the top. So the top is uphill. It's relatively flat otherwise. I'm gonna throw my rainfly on this and call it good. So I hope that helped. I know this is not rocket science. It's not anything super earth shattering for those of you that have camped a lot or spent a bunch of time in the woods. But for those of you just getting started and wondering, where the hell do I put my tent? Well, those are some things to keep in mind. Just, you know, look out for drainage, understand that it's not always gonna be flat, put your head uphill, try to stay perpendicular to the hill, look out for garbage, stuff like that. But if you have other questions or tips for tent placement, whether you're moto camping or just camping or whatever, please feel free to leave them in the comments, share those with other people. And please consider subscribing to the channel because I'm the Dork on the road and I wanna be your internet riding buddy. And I'm better than your regular riding buddies because I come with a mute button. Thank you for watching, and please do not forget to be excellent to each other. Oh, thank you.